Mrs. Doubtfire. It's so awesome. Whoops.
You know, the thing was, he was diagnosed with a mental problem. And
I know.
had to went different.
It was some form of part. Now, why? Oh, wait a minute. You know what? I need to get out of my emails. I know, it was very, very sad.
Yeah, we have recording the
Okay.
videos on the
Okay. Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. And again, as I put in my description, this presentation is drawn from an NYU Faculty Resource Network seminar that I attended in January in Puerto Rico. That was really pretty incredible. And the instructor is one of the most, Catherine Cabeen, she is one of the most outstanding individuals with just tremendous humanity that I have ever met. And I just felt so blessed to have been able to attend that. I learned a lot from her. That was a week long and there was a lot more depth. I've shared some of her readings. She went into some things that I did not go into. And full disclosure, and I'm sure that all of you will relate to this. My office has been moved to Atlantic City. So everything's packed up. So my notes were packed away. So I unpacked my entire office. And of course, what did I never find? My notes from the seminar, but that's okay. There is a Google Drive with a lot of documentation. And then I decided to do some additional research. So I'm going to present, I have about 18 slides, a couple of videos, but I'd also like us to share, because I think that we are all experiencing some of the behavioral health challenges that our students are experiencing that are spilling into the classroom. And I really, truly believe that if a student is struggling, learning is not a priority for them. They're not able to. So I think that we have a responsibility to help them if we can. So I decided to put this on the second slide. I'm sure we're all familiar with this quote. Everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Be kind always. I strive to be kind to my students. I strive to be empathetic. I strive to be compassionate. I'm going to share a few anecdotal things as I move through my presentation. Last December, I had a student who stopped coming to class. He hadn't been in class for 2 or 3 weeks. He had been my preceptee from freshman year. So he showed up for his team's presentation that day, and he showed up late. And at the beginning of class, I said to him, I'd like to speak with you after class. So as he approached me at the end of class, it was just him and I in the room. I said to him, and I was kind of stern, where have you been? This is so unlike you. And he's about 6'3", 6'4", a very nice young man. And I said, you showed up late for the presentation today, you let your team down, and so on and so forth. This is what I did not expect. He started crying. So of course he started crying. And of course, what I do, I start crying. I break out the tissues and I said, what's going on? And then of course my tone softened, even getting a little emotional talking about it. That was really hard for me. And we talked for quite a while. He was in pretty bad depression. He stopped going to lacrosse. He was on the lacrosse team at Stockton. He stopped going to his classes. It was his last semester. And I asked him more than once, have you gone to the counseling center? I asked him very directly, are you having thoughts about harming yourself? Does your family know? I dug a little deeper. He had a couple siblings. He lived on campus. He was in a roommate situation that was not ideal. And he had pretty much checked out. He was in pretty severe depression. Contacted my dean. I wanted some guidance. I filled out a CARES report. I asked him if I could have his cell phone number. I was following up with him. And, I think that is just the tip of the iceberg. And I've dealt with these issues with other students. I've been here a long time. This is, I think, my 35th year at Stockton. So I've dealt with a lot over the years, but I feel in recent years, it's gotten much worse. Our students are struggling, and I don't think it's business as usual in academia. We cannot just assume that we are solely focusing on educating them and ignoring everything else. I think there's a lot of factors. I think technology is a factor, their cell phones. I think just, coming up K through 12, the parenting role has changed. I have 2 children. My daughter historically has struggled with anxiety and depression. She's going to be 25 next month in September. My son's older. He's fine, a little bit of anxiety, but nothing debilitating. With my daughter, it has been. And years ago, I said to my daughter, can I talk to my students about your struggles? And I do that because we don't talk about mental health issues. If someone has a heart condition, we talk about it. If they have issues with cholesterol or diabetes, we talk about it. The stigma needs to be removed. Students are embarrassed. That's what the student in December told me. I'm embarrassed. I don't want my family to know. I don't want my friends to know. But he was in pretty bad shape. So, and I'm hoping we can also share you can all share at the end of the session. Okay, so the goals of the workshop. So I want to convey some statistics which I researched about just the mental health struggles of college students, which, as we all know, was exacerbated by the pandemic. Provide definitions of trauma as well as trauma-informed pedagogy. Discuss how universities are recognizing and adapting, and they are. It's become front and center for many universities. Advanced faculty strategies for addressing, we'll talk a little bit about that. Provide some additional resources and that were shared with me through the NYU Faculty Resource Network seminar. And then again, I thought at the end of the session, we could share some of our own experiences. So this is the definition of trauma. I'm assuming it's big enough for everyone to see. There's all kinds of trauma, right? About 15 years ago, I don't know if any of you remember, we had a young student from, she was from Hamilton. She was probably a junior, senior. Her and her friends were drinking. She fell in the parking garage. I don't know if anyone remembers this, and she died. I had one of her roommates in class with me that semester. She fell, and I remember it was like 15 or 17 years ago. Does that sound about right? It's a while ago. She was an athlete. I mean, she was a star. The student class was a real standout, but I had her roommate in class and she was not doing well. And I was just writing notes on our quizzes, and she and I were back and forth. And she wrote me many years later and said, you pretty much saved me that semester, because she said I was suicidal. I was not in a good place. She never went back to the apartment where they lived. And so again, there's all kinds of trauma, right? And sometimes our students are using things to cope that aren't necessarily good for them, drinking, substance abuse. And then this is the definition of trauma-informed pedagogy. What are some of your experiences related to this? Ross, have you noted things? Go ahead.
Well, yeah, certainly. My younger son, absolutely had a difficult with anxiety and so depression. I have in the past. I'm aware of a mental condition, and so one experience I had was we got an email from a student saying I'm signed up to your class, I'm not sure if we're going to be able to come to it because I suffer from anxiety and it's going to be quite a problem to get to class, etc. etc. But I'm not sure if you brought your class to the time. I just said, well, look, I also have suffered from anxiety and mental issues. So if you ever need to talk to someone, you know, you can come and talk to me about it. Safe. And she wrote back to me and she said, wow, never had a professor say that to me before. Thank you. I'll definitely take you up on that if I need it. And I think empathy, showing your vulnerabilities to the student is a huge thing.
Russ, and you know what, I so agree with that. And so many of them feel they're alone. They're really not alone in this. And I've even shared with them, I direct them to the appropriate resources, but I share with them things my daughter has done and to help her cope. And she's in a completely different place today, not on any medication, but you know, she was an athlete for much of her life, but journaling, meditation. I mean, there are a lot of things that you can do. But again, empathy, compassion, being tuned in. You know, I had a student in the spring who stopped coming to class, another situation. And I wrote him and I said, where have you been? You know, we've missed you. And then he came to class the following week. And you know what he told me? He said, your email got me out of bed. I went into a bad depression. So again, I put the resources right on my syllabi. So I think it's and again, we were not trained in this area, but this is just me personally. I feel we have a responsibility to be tuned into them. And think of it this way, if we save one life, that matters, right? I mean, I've had students who have committed suicide over the years. I've taken it very, very hard, very difficult. And so, I just think, again, being aware. Okay, so these are a couple of brief videos I wanted to share. Adam, why is this? I'm hitting control and clicking. Why is nothing happening?
Maybe try without control.
Okay,
There you
thank
go.
you.
Yeah, when it's in presentation mode, I don't
Okay.
think control works. When it's out of presentation mode, that's when you need control.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hello, welcome to McDonald's. May I take your order, please?
ご注文はお決まりですか?
Quarter pounder
Get
with
the supper
cheese.
food.
Royal with cheese.
We reported earlier this month about significant declines in college enrollment. We now have a new report about what's pushing current students to rethink their time in school. Gallup surveyed 12,000 students, and the top two reasons undergrads last year considered pausing their education were for emotional stress and personal mental health. Emotional stress and mental health are also among the top reasons some adults never enrolled at all. Joining us now is Dr. Jessie Gold. She's an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry at Washington University. Doctor, what are the biggest causes for this emotional stress for students?
I think people forget that college students have always been stressed, and it's definitely a time period of transition. You go from maybe living at home to living with people all the time, eating with people, sleeping with people. It's a big time of identity development, and it's also a big time for experimentation with substances. If you add on to that what the pandemic has done, which has created a lot of social isolation, has really distorted that image of what college was supposed to be for people as they're doing it online, and has made that really different for socializing and making connections. I think all of that compounds to be where we are right now with their mental health.
The Gallup report says 47% of female students experience emotional stress compared to 30% of males. How do you hear those numbers? What do you think accounts for that?
We often see higher numbers in women for all things mental health. It's hard to exactly pinpoint why. Some people might point to the rise of social media and the impact on self-esteem, and some of those numbers tend to impact females more. If you look at the recent CDC data for young girls and suicide, a lot of the data suggests that there's a lot of trauma in women, and you'd imagine that's contributing. And maybe it's just the way that we express and feel emotions differently, and maybe we process with groups, and maybe that men don't, and maybe that leads to different numbers in the way that we're testing and measuring this. But either way, I think it's really important to have targeted interventions and make sure that kids are getting treated when they need to be.
And speaking about targeted interventions, how should parents think through the decision process if their child comes to them and saying that they want to take time off? How should parents always say yes, of course, or is there a decision tree you should run through as when you're thinking about these things as a parent?
I think it's really hard as a parent not to immediately freak out if you hear your kid say that they don't want to go to school anymore. That's a huge decision. You have to realize that emotions impacting that decision might mean that their head is not clear and immediately making that choice for the long term. You want to be there, support them, listen, not immediately like leap to action and change things. Try to figure out what you can do to help in the interim. Maybe they just need to take a less of a course load and have mental health treatment. Work out the options with them if they want it. Make sure you're always checking on them and really validating their experience along the way.
Great advice as a parent of college kids. Dr. Jessie Gold, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And I've had students come to me in crisis mode, and then they're worried about finishing. And you know what, and my daughter had to take a break from LaSalle for a while because of what she was going through. School will always be there. Mental health, that should be the priority. And then they're afraid to tell their parents. And, we talk to our preceptees about things. But I wish we could figure out a way to help students build their coping mechanisms. Again, I think that is something that occurs as they are developing. I have another brief one.
Made with the world's smoothest vodka plus real juice. New White Claw Vodka Soda.
London Cruz, in her first semester away at college, was struggling.
My classes were hard, and, I just felt lost.
Academically and socially, virtual classes were more difficult for Cruz, who has a learning disability, and isolating COVID restrictions made her anxious and depressed.
I attempted to take my life, and I instantly called my boyfriend, and I was like, I'm so sorry.
That call saved her life after she'd taken a handful of pills.
There is no other feeling as a parent to see your child in a coma and knowing that it was too much for her to handle.
A recent study done in the fall of 2020 found that students are struggling at an all-time high. 39% screened positive for symptoms of major depression. Another 66% battling loneliness, and 13% have seriously considered suicide in the past year.
You can feel their mental health slipping.
Colonel Mark Anarumo saw it firsthand. The president of Norwich University moved into the student dorms for a week during in-room quarantine to offer his support, and did it again this week.
In general, do you think it's a good idea, this type of isolation for this age group?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and my short answer is no.
When the school's COVID numbers spiked, Anarumo followed CDC guidelines, but says despite how numbers may change, he won't do it again.
I think it's very unhealthy and not fair to those young men and women.
His gesture to join ranks was a mission to listen and learn from his own students.
They're here for the social interaction. They're here for experiential learning.
Without it, many found themselves in a dark place.
I would tell people, I just need a hug right now. That's all I need right now.
Would you describe this as one of the lonelier times in your life?
Yes, 110% yes. It is so difficult. FaceTime can only do so much.
It's partly why Cruz has taken this semester off and is living back home. She's hopeful to return to school in the fall when restrictions have eased and when she feels whole again.
I learned that it's okay to ask for help.
And larger lessons about the protections and harms of social distance. Katie Beck, NBC News.
Work actually taught here for several years.
Oh, wait, really?
Yeah, he was the criminal justice program. He was assigned by the Air Force here for 2 years to teach it next year.
How cool is that he moved into the dorms though?
Yeah.
I mean, talk about showing support, right? So, I mean, I think that again, this is anecdotal, but tip of the iceberg, right? I think it's candidly, I don't know, I think it's getting worse, which is why schools are responding. So any thoughts about the videos?
It's interesting that I think in the first video, they talked about, you know, the big change, you're with people all the time. And then the other was the other extreme, that the students are isolated. And so it sounds like, you know, it's for students to navigate to find maybe half your medium between those 2 or 3.
But something I learned in the spring, and I'm going to share this with you. I was going to share it with you at the end, but I'll share it now while I'm thinking of it. So coming off the seminar, I thought, okay, what can I do? Right. So I did something that I've never done, which I plan to do every semester moving forward. I handed out note cards the first week of class to all my students. And I said, okay, I want you to do 3 things. Put your name on the note card. If you are struggling with anything at this point in your life, please share it with me so I'm aware. And then the third thing I had them do to make it a little more positive was to express gratitude for something. So if you decide to use this technique, I will simply say to you, read the cards in the privacy of your office or your home, because I got pretty emotional. I had students whose parents are dying. One student whose parent was dying from leukemia, another student whose parent had leukemia, one had just lost a spouse in their 20s. We had a coach here who had an inoperable brain tumor. I think one of my students was on the softball team, but the list went on and on. And what I wanted to say about being alone is that more than one student wrote, although I'm on campus, I'm with other students, I don't know where I fit in. I'm very lonely. I feel very alone. And so I took all the cards. And what I did when I collected them is I took them from each, very private, right? Each student individually. And then what I did at the end of the semester was I wrote notes on the other side back to every student, put them in an envelope with their name on it, and don't laugh. I put some candy inside because candy is always fun, right? But I wanted to know so that if they don't show up for a couple weeks, I have the card. I can just simply write them and say, are you okay? You know, one of the students said, my brother's coming home. She's the one, her dad was dying. She said, I can't make class this week. My brother's coming in town. I said, you be with your family. And I was glad she let me know, but so I'm going to use those. I'm going to do this every semester because again, it's information. And, you know, so any other thoughts about the videos, Russ?
I was fixing my hair.
I was amazed at that statistic, 13% of students have thought about suicide.
I have more, yeah. Yeah.
And so that's giving me something really to think about. And what it's, apart from that idea about cards, which is wonderful, I'm stealing that idea.
Oh, no, please, you're not stealing, we're sharing. I mean, yeah.
I don't know what's copyright anymore. I'm taking an idea. And one thing I always do at the start of my first lecture, especially to younger students, is I make myself vulnerable and tell them about what I've been through. And I haven't experienced suicide ideation. I'm going to tell them that. Because I've been completely vulnerable. I think that will make them more inclined to reach out.
So then it makes us more human, right? And then they can maybe relate a little bit better to us. So yeah, I agree. All right. So I'm going to share, these are some, I put troubling statistics. I drew these from some pretty credible sources. I mean, 77% of our students are experiencing moderate to serious psychological distress. Going back to something Russ said earlier, I've had students that have such terrible social anxiety disorder come into class is so overwhelming for them. So, I mean, sometimes we just need to work with them. Anxiety, it seems to be so prevalent anymore. Depression, trauma, eating disorders, obsessive compulsive disorders, bipolar, substance abuse. I mean, all of these things are affecting our college students. And of course, there's all different kinds of trauma. And then almost 9 in 10 say, you know, who face academic challenges, say those challenges also impact their mental health. So if they're not doing well to begin with, and you have faculty who just pile, and I'm not saying don't give them work, of course, but I think it needs to be reasonable. You know, my preceptees will sometimes say to me, I can't get through 6 books in one class. Why did this professor do this? You know, why are there exams every week? And so I don't know. I think it's important to be mindful of that. Something I've done, I've shifted heavy work from the very end of the semester to more 3/4 of the way through. Students have thanked me for that. Thank you for not having this big report due the last week, because I have 3 other big projects due that week. And I try to spread it out. I have them do projects in phases, you know, because again, they face a lot at the end of the semester. This is drawn from, I think, the same source. 28% of students say they often felt isolated from others, even with being on campus. This applies more so to transgender, non-conforming, and the LGBTQIA+ students. This I thought was an interesting statistic. College athletes, especially in women's sports, experience heightened levels of negative mental health symptoms. So more so, that's a group maybe that the schools need to focus a little more heavily on. And then just 40% of students think that their school is doing enough to address their mental health needs. Some remedies. So they're facing a lot of challenges. It's not just coursework, it's relationships, it's adjustment to campus life, especially freshman year. We all know that. That freshman year is really tough for students, especially that first semester if they're living away from home. Economic strain. They have financial challenges that many of us did not have. Yes, we went through school. Yes, I had an undergraduate loan. I put myself through my 2 advanced degrees, but the price tag, nothing like it is today. I told both my kids, we're going for the value. I mean, I didn't let my kids go into $100,000 in debt. A lot of students come out with that kind of debt, and they're not guaranteed jobs. And then obviously, you know, social injustice, terrorism, mass violence on a regular basis, and then coming off COVID-19. So universities have responded by trying to foster a culture of wellness. They're increasing counseling resources and introducing things like group therapy, peer counseling, and telehealth. Simply adding clinicians is not pragmatic or effective. I did put some notes in here, but I don't seem to see them. I remember reading in this article that for every 120 students that have mental health needs on campus, there's 1 counselor, right? I had a graduate class do projects years ago, and one of the companies was for a virtual organization who offered mental health guidance globally. And I remember this statistic: for every 1,000 people in the world that need a professional, or for every 1,000 that need a professional, there's 1. So, I mean, we're obviously in crisis across the board. Schools are thinking creatively about how to best serve students' mental health needs, moving beyond their traditional clinician-student model. One-on-one sessions sometimes are necessary, especially for trauma. But then they're offering workshops, like for things like time management, for example, if students are having difficulty juggling, and then peer counseling for interpersonal conflict. roommate issues. They had a recent breakup with a significant other. And then something that was pointed out in the article is that the group therapy in particular is helping to decrease the stigma surrounding mental health because they're in a group, okay, with their peers. Faculty are considered the first line of defense. In this article, they talked about faculty being first responders. We're frontline. We're with them. We connect with them on a regular basis. Now, obviously, this is a little harder to do in a purely online or even a synchronous setting online, but in the classroom, you know, there's a student, again, I had in the spring, he was my preceptee from freshman year. And I remember the first day of class, I saw him and I thought, wow, he just had a whole different demeanor. And then when he shared on his card what was going on in his life, I immediately understood it. But there was a sadness about him, and it's almost like his light went out. And again, I knew him because I had advised him for 4 years. It's important to show a sense of care. I think Russ said this, or caring, compassion, empathy, and trying to recognize if a student seems like they're in distress. Have they stopped coming to class? Have they stopped submitting assignments? Do they have a disheveled appearance? Historically, faculty were not equipped really to engage in this. And so many schools now are offering training and workshops, and they're partnering faculty with counselors or a counseling team to help them with this. Some course policy and pedagogy suggestions: be somewhat flexible. I have a line in, and we walk a fine line here. I mean, I want my students to understand the importance of submitting their work, meeting deadlines. But I have a line in bold in my syllabus that if there has been an extenuating circumstance, they simply need to let me know and I will work with them. So I think we need to be flexible, but we can't not have any deadlines. We can't not have any rigor. We can't not have any structure. Okay, integrating mental health topics into the curriculum. Lectures on gratitude, attention, and healthy habits. Now, this may not be a fit for every class, but I'm doing this a little bit with the cards at the beginning. Shifting activities every 20 minutes or so. And then when I took the NYU, when I attended the seminar, the instructor had formerly been a professional dancer. So she uses a lot of physical activities to reduce stress, having us stretch, different movements, having us meditate. She had us go on a walk with another person in January where we walked and we weren't allowed to speak during the entire time and just take in nature. So she's much more knowledgeable in that area. So I'm going to include it FYI. Prior to semester start. So during the seminar, there were probably about 12 of us in the room, 3 of us from Stockton. So a few of the individuals shared that they came to realize that the content in their course was a trigger. So if they were talking about rape, for example, or other kinds of trauma, they said sometimes a student will get up and just leave the room. And then they learned that that student would be in the bathroom crying, right? Because it had triggered something. So they said what Catherine recommended was have warnings in your syllabi about some of the content, that it may be difficult for them to watch it. So for example, if I was going to show, like I just showed those videos and one of them was talked about suicide, I would warn my students about some of the topics because they may have had a friend or a relative that passed from that, to just kind of prepare them. Okay. She also said you should encourage students to draft a plan for self-care. My daughter, again, is a big believer in journaling. You know, she's encouraged me to journal. I mean, I've struggled with anxiety over the years myself, and it really does help. And you just write down whatever comes to mind. But she said the key, Mom, is to never look at it again. Just turn the page, right? But it's a way for you to kind of remove it from here, put it on paper. It also, I find for me, when I'm having a lot of anxiety, it really interferes with my sleep. So if I journal and then I go to bed, I'm much better. 20 to 50% of college students experience food insecurity. So I think I'm putting this on my syllabi now. The link for the food assistance program at Stockton. We have the, what is it called? The food pantry on campus. If you're in line, I do this. If there's a student behind me, I'll pay for them, or a student in front of me, I'll pay for them. This one student, I think I bought her a drink. I mean, you would have thought I gave her about $500. And she said, oh my gosh, I can't, thank you so, can I give you a hug? I'm like, okay, fine, yeah, sure. I said, have a great day. But when my students wrote about gratitude, one of them said somebody bought me a coffee, someone held the door for me, someone complimented my outfit. It's just those little things, right? Okay, and then I've listed some resources here, some of Stockton's resources. I include all of this on my syllabi. We got an email in July that we have recently partnered with Will, which provides free immediate access to teletherapy for students, which I think is wonderful. During the semester, gauge the temperature of the classroom regularly, especially mid-semester. Acknowledge and discuss upsetting current events if something has happened, a school shooting, whatever. I think it's probably healthy to just talk about it a little bit. Encourage dialogue about any demeaning behavior that occurs between students. That happens in class sometimes. And I will have students, it's very rare, but they will disrespect each other. The NYU instructor referred to it as trauma dumping. And then students will maybe start attacking each other. You need to shut it down and you need to talk about it. Okay, now I'm teaching primarily business courses. It doesn't happen a lot, but a few times I've had a few students over the years who have been disrespectful of me and vocal. And I've had where a student will say, this is a complete waste of time. We shouldn't be doing this, like reviewing for exams. And then before I could even say anything, I had a student say, no, it's not. We need this. Let her continue. This student was very brash and disrespectful we have difficult students sometimes. He was one of them. Administer a mid-semester evaluation so students can raise issues. Just need to handing out paper and just collecting. Encourage a community of caring within the classroom. And I think just modeling empathy. Final thoughts. So this is drawing from the resource, faculty resource seminar. We are not therapists. We're not trained to be therapists. We can talk about what we've experienced. I got to talk about my daughter. I think that's healthy, but we need to direct them to the appropriate parties. It's very important. I think we need to be honest about our limitations. Even though for me, I mean, again, that student in December, I followed up with him. I was very, very concerned. And then I followed up with CARES to find out if they had reached out to him. So I think, we need to direct them to the appropriate, but that doesn't mean we can't sit with them and we can't talk with them. Sometimes there was a student that was down in G wing where my lower G, where my old office was. And I was in the wing and a student came in frantic, looking very upset. I didn't know him. And he said, my best friend just died in a car accident. So I just, he said, can you give me a hug? I really need a hug. So I said, of course. And of course I said, please go to the wellness center. And I said, and please do not get in a car and go home, because he was not in a good frame of mind. So of course there are things we can do, but I think it's just, there's moments, things happen, life happens. Faculty are people too and need to practice self-care. Now, December, when that happened with me, I went home, I cried at dinner to my husband that night. I didn't sleep well that night. I internalize everything. I say it's a positive, but it's a negative for me. because I feel very deeply. But until I found out that he was okay and CARES had contacted him, I needed that gave me some peace of mind. An important goal of trauma-informed pedagogy is to avoid compounding harm. Frameworks need to be developed for encouraging. I mean, we want our students to succeed, but we want them to do so in a healthy way. Okay, and so some questions for discussion at the end. I think we're doing pretty good. Okay. What have been your experiences? How did you resolve? And what have you learned from your own? I mean, I've learned a lot just from things that have happened with students in the classroom and from that seminar. It was really pretty incredible. Thoughts?
I've used trigger warnings in my classes, and I've given the students the permission to,
Yes.
That's fine. And there's times when I followed them out the door because I knew what they did with, just to make sure that they were okay. But the issue, I've had the world students over the kids. But sometimes that most brash and aggressive student, it needs help too. So sometimes it's like, can we talk later? I didn't appreciate the comment, and is there something going on? Because sometimes that's a mask for stuff,
I spoke with him. I did speak with him privately, and candidly, he just had a pretty terrible attitude. And I did encourage him to seek some counseling, but I did feel, and I try not to always go there, I felt that I was being demeaned in part because I was a female. And I've been a professional for decades. I don't imagine it. When I sense it, it's there. So, but I agree. But I do not, I think the other thing is when that happens in class, of course, you never want to embarrass a student, but I will speak with students privately. Yeah.
But I just think that's important to remember that when you see unusual behavior or behavior,
yes,
sometimes there's more behind it, and that's, even though they might not be emotionally, in other ways, that's their way of, they're angry about something else.
Coping.
Right. If they're male, because it's an easier thing. I don't know. Sexist now.
Yeah, I don't want to, but I'm just saying that's what it happens. And luckily it's rare, but it happens. But it was so funny because the student who called him out was a female student and basically shut him down. And I just thought, wow, you have courage. And it was a class of about 35 students, so it wasn't a small class. Okay, other thoughts? Other experiences? Russ? No, Russ is awesome.
I'm so glad I came to this talk. The only reason I came to it was because Jeff Barr was presenting. I wasn't sure what you were going to be talking about. I sort of got just at it. I'm so glad I came. There's two techniques in psychology. Every year there's a new psychology. Do this, do that, do this. Very few of them are clinically tested and shown to be effective. But there are two that have been tested very well and shown to be effective. One of those is CBT, cognitive behavior therapy.
Okay.
And yeah, you can learn about that, but that's a bit more advanced. The other one that's been shown to be effective, anyone can learn it. A parent can learn this, and this child, anyone can learn this technique, it's effective. And so I think all faculty should be trained in it, or should go and find out how to learn how to do this themselves. And that's called motivational interviewing.
Motivational interviewing. Okay, interesting.
Write it down.
Okay.
Find out what it is. Train yourself to do it. If you find yourself in a one-on-one situation with a student, motivational interviewing is basically talking to someone, interviewing them with no judgment, just encouragement. But the way it works is the person being interviewed, the student, figures out the problem for themselves.
Mm.
You don't tell them what the solution is. You guide them towards a solution, but they find the solution. Not you. You don't say, do this. You say, what the hell? What do you do? Because if they find out the solution in their own with their own mind,
Mhm.
be much more effective. So motivational interviewing, I think every faculty member should be trained in motivational interviewing.
Love that. So they're solving their own problems. Yeah, and the discussion is them having an opportunity, maybe think out loud, and so the faculty member would direct the that's great. I love
It goes
that.
back to that quote, you know, the mind holds with most conviction, the mind works in this, rather than what it's told.
That's great. And I just, that made me think of, what is that Maya Angelou quote? The one about someone won't remember what you said or what you did, but something to the effect of, but how they made you feel. And that's really, what I think then you're really able to reach them. By the way, just as an aside, my daughter is reading all 7 of her autobiographies, so she's gotten me involved in that. So I'm only on the first one, When the Caged Bird Sings. It's extraordinary. I mean, I can't even describe what she does with words. I mean, I've obviously as an academic read a lot, I've read even, personal reading. I am so enamored with her writing. It's incredible. So I think my daughter's on the 5th one. So she has them. So if she gets through them, then I get them. So, okay, let's see. What else do I have here? So these are some and please feel free to write me, Jennifer, if you want this. I'll be happy to share this. Oh no, Russ, please, please.
Everyone should be writing their autobiography. It's serious.
Yeah.
Say to ChatGPT, interview me for my autobiography.
Oh.
It will interview you and produce your autobiography.
Really?
Everyone should be right. That should be one.
Interesting.
To leave it for your
Interesting.
children, the next generation, whoever.
Mhm.
If you become a bestseller,
That would be nice.
Everyone should be writing.
I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think that's it we're actually done a little bit early if we'd like to share. I don't know, is anyone on Zoom? Anyone on Zoom, Adam, that wants to share anything?
I did get one question, but
Okay.
I already clarified that. It's about a question, but I do have a hand raised from Joel.
Okay.
Do you want to ask the question via here?
Yeah.
Let me see if I can hear you.
Joelle, can you hear me?
Yeah, Joelle, there she is. Joelle. Hey, Joelle.
Hi, Joelle.
I'm glad you're doing this because I agree with you. I've seen an increase of students needing more support, emotionally, mental health. I can share a lot of experiences with you, but I'll just say that I hope, I think this needs to be a larger university-wide conversation. I'm glad you're doing this workshop, but I think the university should address this. And I think faculty need a lot of support in this area as well. Like you're saying that, we're not qualified to deal with a lot of issues that have been coming up around this. But many years ago, I had a student in my G course and he was slipping, I recognized it and, I spoke with him and he said, well, I'll go down and I'll, when I get you, I said, no, let's go now. I will walk you down to the wellness center. So walking him down, I walked him down personally to the wellness center and he got connected with, folks there and they were able to support him, to finish his classes that semester. So, I agree that we can intervene, but I think we can also only intervene, to a certain extent. And I think the university got a large grant, recently.
Joelle, did they get that grant? I'm aware of, I spoke with the assistant provost. I forget her name. I was in a session. I was in something with her in January or February. She told me they had applied for a grant for trauma-informed pedagogy. And I think it was something to do with NYU. And she asked me if I would get involved. And I said, I mean, I'm not an expert. I'm not professing to be an expert, but I feel there's such a need, which is why I wanted to do this workshop today. And I saw Kathy Klein earlier in the hall, and she said to me, could you do this through the Center for Learning Design? And I said, absolutely. But so Stockton is recognizing, so we did get the grant then.
I did read recently that we had
Okay, we got it.
$1 million grant for mental health programs.
Okay, good. Thank God. I mean, it's really, it's bad. It's bad. We cannot act like, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's good. That's great news. Good. Thanks, Joelle. Appreciate your sharing. Would anyone else like to share? And Russ, please, the note card idea was just, I did that. I just thought of that on my own. But I think we all need to think of things we can do and share with each other, right? Yeah.
Anna just says, oh, wow, thank you so very much, Jennifer, for this presentation. Such a timely topic, especially after more of us are experiencing increasing cases like this.
You're welcome. And thank you for attending, and thank you for sharing. Oh, is there a hand up? Yeah, Heather.
This is different, like your approach and what you wanted is a little bit different, but dovetails a little bit with the work on campus by people who are working with resiliency prompts and journaling for students. So if you don't know about that, that's a whole thing. I have my students giving them now what they do in the class. They log in Canvas, they do their prompts, and then once a week, this is kind of like the reading part that it continues. I do it for my freshman classes, I do it differently for upper level classes. Every Monday they just do a quick update. Sometimes they just tell me, are you doing okay, not okay, great? And then if they want to elaborate, they can. Sometimes I change it up now, so it's a little more fun. So sometimes it's like, which of these trash cans allergies do you feel like today? Colleagues at other schools could do it with a Likert scale. How are you doing today? So lots of different models that you can use. I will say it takes 1 minute, right? So it's just the last minute of class. I say go in and log in and do your weekly update. So it's not something anybody can do. It really doesn't need to do its homework, right? It doesn't need to take a whole lot of time. It just prompts them to share if there's something going on with them, and then I can connect them with resources if need be.
So Heather, so are you doing this online then? Or are they?
My class is face to face, but they do it.
Like how do you have access to their journals? Do you okay, it's in Blackboard. Gotcha. That's great. Okay.
Assignment they do. I mean, it's not graded, so if you don't do it, it doesn't matter. It's just I give them time in class.
That's great. But you're encouraging what the instructor at NYU said, you're encouraging them to practice self-care. And journaling is one way to do that.
Frequently I ask, how are you doing? What can you do to help yourself? And what can I, or sometimes if I have a determined or a tutor or something associated with the class, what can that person do to help you? What could we do institutionally? Right. What can you do? How are you? And the majority of them on a given Monday are everything's fine, right? So it's each week it's responding to the 2 to 3 who things are not fine.
Yes.
They're not sleeping well or something's happened with them. But I do want to encourage you to do something like that. You could do it with a note card in class if you wanted to. It doesn't take a huge amount of time. The majority of students will report being okay in most weeks, but when they're not, then you can target that follow up.
And that's awesome. And also the students that are coming into class with existing mental health issues, behavioral health, mental health, they're the ones that will be more likely to struggle. And something else that was interesting that I read is that a lot of students, once they enter college, have already gone to therapy for different things over the years, so it's not that foreign to them. The other thing I did in the spring, and don't laugh, but I would do some assignments, sometimes in writing, just collect them to see if they did the readings. I went back to putting stickers on their papers when I handed them back. And you should see, I mean, I know it's so funny, but the glee, I would put a couple of stickers.
On their phone. Like,
The glee,
But when
yeah.
I give stickers, they love it, and
They
like, get
do.
upset if I forget one or
They,
if they're not cool.
they love stickers, and sometimes will be like, oh, I like that sticker better. They love stickers, they love candy.
I can only speak for the student affairs professional side of this. Humanities, most definitely, I think there is a barrier between faculty and students. Can't really speak, most of my students, with the military population are not traditional, they're adults, they've been in.
Okay.
They understand the rank structure. I feel like those students may find it intimidating to come to a professor unless you've established that rapport of, hey, I am a human being as well. Please come and talk to me. And as well, getting to know your partners in the community on the student affairs side, CARES, Military and Veteran Success Center, different offices, so that way you know how to next step if you see something happen, or just ask questions. You're like, hey, this thing is happening and I don't know where to really go with it, or a student said they're getting activated and getting sent overseas in the next few weeks, actually being you tag team. There's people in the community that are here to assist you. You don't have to be the knower of all the knowledge and all the things, but humanity, breaking down the barrier, building rapport, and then just getting to know your community at large is going to be the best team building point of view, because there's plenty of things that we can touch on the student affairs side that maybe faculty don't let us know about until it's too late, or vice versa. The faculty are like, oh, and then we don't know about it, but the student doesn't come. The same thing, walking students to the wellness center, etc. We're all a team here, regardless of if I'm in front of the classroom or if you're in front. So just get to know us, we'll get to know you, and just let us know what's going on so we can properly help and assess and all that fun stuff.
Thank you so much for that, Emmanuel.
What she's saying is 100%. I had students in the student program, and there was no lot of able to make some adjustments. You know, gave the big purpose that you had. You were thanking them because when the professor was like, "Now, then you wouldn't do it."
I know.
Regular.
I know, it is
I was
regular.
taken aback. I'm like, are you serious? This is so, I didn't realize it was,
Yeah.
I know I experienced it myself, so sure, no problem. You know, you have, my issue is that you have to differentiate between those students who are trying to pull the wool over your eyes, and then those students who are legitimately having issues with problems. Because some students are very manipulative, and they want to try to use this stuff, so they try to go over analysis times. It's the dark side of humanity. That's what I call it, the dark side. But the objective is that once, I always talk about this the very first day, all the information is in syllabus. You have to discuss and talk about it. If you are experiencing problems, I always say life happens. Do not hesitate. Please get to me. Let me know what's going on. You know, so and then long as I found that it's been successful, we discuss it, we talk about it, and I always say, give me legitimate people and I will help you. You know, get something from it. You know, like some stuff you do, some stuff you get, you're saying there, you know.
No military stuff.
No, not the military stuff, but the person should look there.
Yeah.
Stay on top of it. You know, if someone's struggling and cares or whatever is going on, they will say, can you work with this student? We've seen that. Sure, yeah, I'll make accommodations if it's legitimate. But if the student doesn't have the information, it's kind of hard sometimes, you know, and I always point them in that direction and say, listen, you go get that paper, you go get that help, you go get that assistance. Yes, I will do whatever you need. But I just want to point out that there are some professors, they're not really truly, not as empathetic.
I know, they're very rigid. I
That's
know.
what someone said, it needs to be, you know, organizational wide in terms of we're all in this together. And we all play a role, but some people don't want it, they're not as empathetic.
I just want one thing. You raise a really good point. If a preceptee comes to me and they're in crisis, I tell them to get in touch with the CARES program. They need to get it on record, and then I let them know. Then the CARES program will contact all their faculty. So you're right. And I think most of our students, it's legitimate. I think there's just a few where they're trying to get over.
And I've had that, yes.
Yes.
We're gonna have to jump out to the real really quick. Preeti had a question about what you put on Blackboard. I think somebody mentioned about putting something on Blackboard.
For the journaling?
For their journaling?
Yeah,
For the
was for
journaling.
Yeah, well, I do two things. I do every day to start class, they do a resiliency prompt, and sometimes those are from the work that others have done on campus. And sometimes those are ones I've done that are related to the content of the class or the lesson that day. But then once a week, I have students do the weekly check-in, and then I just ask them, the most frequent thing I ask them to do is tell me, okay, great, or not okay, and what, if anything, can you do to help yourself? What, if anything, can manage to your university help you? But I change that up sometimes, and if anybody wants some of my other prompts, and now I have some that are like, which of these sheep in this interview? Which part of the fire do you feel like today? So I've like changed it up somewhat for some weeks, and sometimes I give them both options. You can do the boring option, but if you're bored of that, you can do this other option. I'm willing to share those, what I've done with these other things. But I also know people who do it quantitatively, so if you're quantitative.